Good evening, Utah. And VidDevoChurch and VidDevo. And, well, you know who you are. I like that one psalm that says, "Come bless the Lord, all ye servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the holy place, and bless the Lord, and bless the Lord." I've been in a lot of churches at night. For whatever reason, as a missionary, I either was working on a church, was building a church. One time I was guarding sound equipment. Another time I was in the men's prayer watch. Sometimes I was there just because I wanted to be. But no matter what reason, somehow, throughout my life, I found myself at night with God in a church. When I started setting up this porch, I kept thinking that I wanted to record songs in the night. And it sounded so right, songs in the night. But none saith, where is God my Maker, who giveth songs in the night? When I was in Alaska, I used to go outside of my house, and it had a ramp in the back door, and I'd go out my, house and go over to the garage, and the garage was detached, and on the back side of the garage was a little shed that was built onto it, and so while it had a peak, the back shed was sloped the opposite direction. And so you could lay on it and look up at the sky. And I had my guitar, and where I lived was a quiet neighborhood in Anchorage, but you could see the sky, and we were kind of a little bit on a hill, and it was beautiful. I got a chance to spend a lot of quiet time with God, writing songs. I told a pastor one time that I wrote 400 songs, and he didn't believe me. I know. There are lots of things that he'd never believe me about, but that's okay. But what I did was that I wrote little ditties. Some of them were songs, full-fledged songs. Some of them were just little expressions of love, kind of like what Psalms is. David writing a collection and adding some other people's music to it. But David wrote Psalms of what he was feeling at the time. Sometimes he was up. Sometimes he was down. Sometimes he was telling a story. Sometimes he was trying to relate a truth. But no matter how you look at the book of Psalms, David was being real about how he felt, about his emotions, whether they were good or bad. It didn't matter. Sometimes I don't think people understand when God describes David as a man after his own heart. I really think David was pursuing God's heart more than being the same as God's heart or wanting to be like God's heart. I think David was after his own heart, after it, wanting to be like God, because he saw something in God that went beyond what normal people saw. Kind of like what I see in these plants, or sometimes what I see at night. I look out at the night sky, and I don't see just stars. I see the Lord's return. There's one particular star that always seems to be there for me when I need to be encouraged. I call it the sign of his coming, and I've used it in VidDevo a few times, and it's been beautiful the way that we were able to find some material to put together for it. But it couldn't really capture fully what I was feeling at the time, when God used to speak to me, and I would look at that light, and the light would be like streaming to me, and it was almost as though I could walk up on the starlight straight into heaven. There were times in Klamath Falls, Oregon, where I was so desperately lonely and so sad, so all alone, that I was not in sin. I was just really innocent in those days, and I was standing there on the banks of Lake Ewana, and I would look up and I would see the light that was just coming, streaming across the water to the dock. And I wanted to step off the dock onto the water and walk away with Jesus. And I never did. I've told a story about falling into the water. Technically that's true, because I did try walking on water once. I got wet. But I would stand there at night just pouring out my feelings, just so sad, so desperate, so lonely, that I would cry out to God only, not to anyone else. No one else knew. I mean, they didn't feel it, see it, or hear it. So when I designed this porch, I knew that I was going to do something that I'd done before with plants, and grow them, enjoy them for what they teach me about God. Because plants have a life of their own in some ways. God breathes or causes life to exist in them, and they grow up and they develop in ways that reveals the Godhead, according to the Romans. And so a lot of what I saw in plants, I know that I always wanted to have them around for when I'm putting my hands in dirt. I always felt more peaceful. But the world is coming to an end. And I've noticed that things are changing with Christians and people and things. And they're no longer involved really in just appreciating what God has given. They have to make it into their own image or change it or rearrange it. Kind of like what I'm doing with these plants. I got some of them growing up like trees. But because they're trees of righteousness, I know that the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing. But what I'm talking about is how sometimes people want to save animals or make their dog their buddy, their child or their cat. They worship the animals, whether they'll admit it or not. And that's not right. Or they'll try to become part of worshiping, Mother Earth by saving some pet or some animal or something. Save the wolves. That there's more wolves than we know what to do with, but they're going to save the wolves. And that's sad, I think about how God created the universe, and He meant for us to enjoy it, not to define it or rearrange it, or even giving us dominion over it doesn't mean that we could just do with it what we wanted to, but really to appreciate it, to be able to say to, the night sky, "Oh, where is God my Maker who giveth songs in the night?" Or to be able to be seeking and finding that one star that instead of starlight, star bright, wish I may, wish I might, rather realizing and recognizing that God uses sometimes those stars to remind us what our destiny is like. He said we would be like stars in the firmament, that we would be bright, shining lights. And He calls us the light of the world. I like that. Because sometimes when I look at a star, I think, that's not my star, but that's what I will be when I am far away. People will see me one day and see that my life was like that star. And they won't see the imperfections that maybe I see every day. And I think that's what we want to talk about tonight, in Songs in the Night. We all have imperfections. We all have sins. We all have things we wish we were, but really, when you think about it, they're really things of what we aren't. Because everyone wants to be more than what they are. They want to be better than they are. They want to achieve something. They have a goal. They have a vision. They have an idea. They have a perspective. Something you want. You may be older and you may look back and say, well, I wish I had, or if I could do it over again, I would have changed this or changed that. I've never lived my life that way. No matter what it was, and I've done some pretty radical things in my life, I've never looked back and said, well, I wish I hadn't done that. I just kind of look at it like, well, I did it, and I own it, and I take responsibility for it, and I just admit that I learned from it. I mean, it involves sometimes a lot of heartache for me personally, or maybe a lot of headache for someone else. But the reality of where I am today means that those things that I learned along the way were beneficial to me. So I thank God for them. I thank God for almost everything that's occurred in my life, whether it be Crohn's disease or whether it be blessings like money or finances or jobs or health. I really do sit down and try to give thanks every day, but I don't always make it. And that's why Songs in the Night was something I wanted to do all along, but I really don't do anyways in my life, so it's a hit and miss project. It's not something that I think that, from now on we're going to record Songs in the Night and that you're going to see Utah VidDevo recording it, or VidDevoChurch. No, I think really, it's like this porch when I made it. I put up these lights and I found these little $2 lights that, you can flick on and flick off. I think they're kind of cool because I have a little remote that I can turn it off and turn it on. And that's kind of neat. It, is a neat way to have something that reminds you of like maybe a Disneyland or Enchanted Forest or something that just seems to make it more special or seems to cause you to be inspired. And that's what I've designed this porch for, was to be my garden of Gethsemane, a place where I could pray, a place where I could be alone with God, a place where I could sit and think and meditate. Now go ahead, ask me if I'm doing that. No. Of course not. I come out for a moment or two, and sure, I record like morning devotions and some Bible studies, but for the most part, the rest of the day I'm on my way, just like you, not spending the quality time we say we want to do with God, not taking the extra time we say we should do with God, but really running on in my day without God, or at least maybe not without Him because He's always with us, but not paying attention to Him like I should. And that's why Songs in the Night, I think, is good to be refractive or reflective, to meditate, to do some due considerance or consideration, to take a moment in your nighttime devotions to realize that it's not always going to be the way you think it is. Sometimes it's just going to be what it is what it is. And you just have to accept it for what it is. I'm pretty proud of what God has done with this porch and caused all the plants to grow. They've all been knocked over at one point in time. They've all been dumped, picked up, cleaned up, put back together, and still growing. That's amazing to me. Some of them have been cut up so many times, they must have scars all over them, the root systems, but, I take branches and cut them off, and make more plants. And eventually I wind up with quite a beautiful garden. But that's because I get a sense of satisfaction over doing but not achieving. You see, once it's done, like it is now pretty much, I don't suddenly go, oh, finally I made it. No, I get the joy in the journey. I receive the peace in the perspective of everyday doing the things that need to be done to maintain the garden, to minister to the everyday requirements these plants have, to prune some, to water some, to move some around, to turn some around, to maybe put an extra stick in to help them grow straight. You could say it's a lot like what pastors do in a church. So if you ever wanted to think of me as a pastor, then you are looking at my flock, because I'm not a pastor, but I do like to grow plants. You see, I'm a preacher, and I preach a lot. And because I preach a lot, I don't choose to use a word that doesn't involve preaching. I call myself a preacher because that's what I do. I preach. Now, other ministries like to call themselves pastors when I think they're preachers. Now, maybe they are a pastor. I just don't see it. But according to what the word says, maybe they do visit their sheep and, take care of them, provide for them and help them. Or maybe they just wait for the sheep to come to them. But either way, I guess that's what they call it today. For me, I only have one good shepherd, and so I don't call myself a pastor. I think of Jesus as being the only pastor I have. And a lot of people like to say, well, Chuck Smith was my pastor, or Greg Laurie was my pastor, or Dick Cheney, or somebody, I don't know who. But, they'll always pick some famous name, and, they'll say, well, that was my pastor because he taught me, or he discipled me, or he prayed for me, or he led me to the Lord. I really can't say that. Because even when I had a pastor that was teaching, the Holy Spirit would speak to me about other things, and I would be learning other things at the same time. So when we read that scripture that says, you have no need that any man teach you, but the Spirit of God that dwells within you, he will reveal to you all things. I know it very well only because it happened to me automatically. I didn't go out looking for it. I've never been a man follower or a man pleaser, but in learning from people, I never elevated them higher than what I thought they were. So I guess when they fell, I was a surprise, and I don't understand why we don't just let people keep going, because they're learning more from their failing than they are from their possibly not admitting what a failure we all really are. And that's what Songs in the Night wants to remind you of. It's not so important for you to begin your day with God and end your day with God and somehow lie your way through the day and then at night, pretend that you're better than you are. Songs in the Night, I'd like to make it to where someday we could just get to the place where you and I, we say, hey, I'm not up, I'm down. Or I'm not happy, I'm sad. Or no, it's not always prosperity. Sometimes it's poverty. Or, I'm not faithful. Sometimes I'm faithless. Or whatever it may be for you. For me, it's really, I can't get away from God. And I've told people that a lot, and they still, to this day, I'm sure, don't understand that. But you see, even in my sin, or in my righteousness, in my poverty or my prosperity, in my desperation or in my confirmation, God's in both. God's always been there, and I don't know how to get away from God at all. We used to have this little cartoon that Greg Laurie wrote. I think it was called The Hounds of Heaven, and I think they were surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the day. Yeah, goodness and mercy were like two dogs that would follow you all the days of your life. They were, pictured as dogs following you around in heaven, hounds of heaven. Goodness and mercy. Well, I don't know if that's true, but I know I need the goodness of God every day in my life, and I know I desperately need His mercy every moment of my life. So I kind of like that because it reassures me of where I'm at tonight, where I'm at today. Because I'm not always happy. I can't keep myself in a joy-filled state anymore. I seem to be in a sober-minded mentality that with the end of the world coming so soon, I kind of feel sad about it. I don't feel glad that, oh boy, we're all getting out of here. I'm not really looking at it that way. I kind of see it more like, boy, if God takes me, I'll be thankful. But if He don't, oh boy, it's going to be tough and it's going to be rough. But God knows, and He knows best. And that's why that Father knows best is kind of appropriate tonight, because sometimes people teach you things that aren't true, like the rapture. Oh, the rapture's true, but unfortunately they have this idea about the rapture disaster because so many people are going to be taken. There'll be planes falling out of the skies, and the world will come to an end, and come to a screeching halt because everybody that's a Christian is going in the rapture. Now, when I say it that way, you go, well, of course not. That's not what we believe. But if you ask your pastor, he'll teach you that. Isn't that sad to think that everybody won't be ready to be left behind because nobody warned you that only a few are chosen? Many are called. But if Jesus had thousands following Him and 120 He trusted, and then 70 that seemed to be real close, and then down to even fewer, only 12 God chose for apostles? Wouldn't you want a whole lot more? Interesting, isn't it? Many are called, few are chosen. God seemed to do that throughout the scriptures, always using less to produce more. When He would say to get an army together, He would start cutting off people He didn't want in that army. He'd start refusing to send someone that maybe wasn't prepared. And sometimes I think that would be a good idea here in America. Quit sending all these people that aren't ready, but send only Christians in the army. Because somebody that's not ready to die, go to heaven, if they die, they're going to hell. So why would you want them in the army? They're liable to get killed. Maybe that's just a personal perspective. Maybe that's a good policy to put into place. Send all the Christians. After all, they're supposed to love their enemies. Why not send a Christian to war so that he would show whether he fights the battle with his flesh or with his spirit? I think we could conquer in one day all the battles that are out there in the world if we would just simply believe that God is with us. I don't think many people do today. And because of that, I get sad. I wrote a piece that somebody said was really angry, and it was pretty much quoting Romaine, almost word for word, a lot of what he'd said, and combining them all together, and then talking about the current affairs. And they said, wow, man, that was mad. Well, over 500 people saw it, already, and it's just going on and on. But it brought out the point that why are we saying post-Christian era if God is really in control? If you and I are Christians, and why are we saying we're living in a dark ages, so to speak? If God is still on the throne and Jesus is still seated at the right hand of the Father and we still have the Holy Spirit, I think somebody's got the wrong message. And I think that message is getting pretty effectively used and abused by even Calvary Chapel people and other people too. Billy Graham's even said it. Well, what are you going to do when you live in a post-Christian era? I'm not in a post-Christian era. If it ever happens, I'll let you know. But I think that's called the Great Tribulation period. So I think sometimes I'm sad because I see Satan deceiving so many Christians that know better. So many born-again pastors that should know the truth, but don't seem to know. And that's saddening in some ways. I feel grieved a lot lately over a lot of the things that are going on in the world and the church. Even in Calvary Chapel, I'm grieved over some things. And God knows, because he's already done some things about it. I don't know, maybe it's just me and the Lord, or maybe it's me making it up, but God seems to do things for me when I'm this saddened or sorrowful about a church that I used to be a part of, or a ministry that I used to be involved with. And God bless them, whatever they're doing, but they've got some issues they have to resolve, hopefully soon, because it's affecting a lot of people. But that's why I started Songs in the Night, was to be able to vent, to be able to let go, like that crazy Frozen song, I guess, Let It Go. To be able to feel as though when I'm teaching and when I'm reaching out to you with the things of the Spirit, that God is taking those things and recording them in heaven and then presenting them to our Father for his will to be done in each one of them. That's called an attitude of prayer. And in my night meditations, that's the way I take all of my life, is to be in a constant prayer. Was the only way to achieve that, but to be in that attitude or that knowledge of everything you're saying and doing should be a prayer to God. Keith Green once sang a song that said something like, take my life, make my life a prayer to you. I want to do what you want me to. No token prayers, no white lies. No token prayers, no compromise. I want to give the life you live. Through your Son, you said you'd save us from ourselves and our despair. It comforts me to know you're really there. Thank you for being merciful to me. Oh, I'm so hard to see when my eyes are on me. I know the song. I just kind of I am so blitz tired that I'm struggling with you tonight. I even tried to make some coffee that was horrible. But I know if I don't start sharing songs in the night, teaching, then the Spirit doesn't seem to come alive or quicken me. And then I feel even sadder and more sorrowful and really down and out and all about kind of what the world's involved in and not really being like the light. But you know, there is a time for joy, but there's also a time for sorrow. There's a time for peace, but there's also a time for crying. There's a time of war, but there's also a time of healing. Sometimes it isn't always praise. Sometimes it's sorrowful. And sometimes it's mourning. You know, it isn't always what it should be. And it isn't always what it could be. But one thing I can tell you is that what it always will be is with Jesus. Because he said he'd never leave you. So, if I could give you a comforting word tonight to think about as you get ready to sleep and as I turn off those lights and these lights above me, they automatically go off at night or daytime. They have a little sensor on them. They're actually just little night lights that I got structured in such a way that they really are bright. But if I could encourage you before you lay your head to the pillow, you are the one that gives songs in the night. You are the one that God gave voice to offer up in the middle of the night when you don't hear the birds sing. It's time for you to bring your song in the night, your melody of love, your medley of praise. Not putting on your favorite artist or Christian music or worship leader. But if you want to know what God meant by worshiping in spirit and in truth, he meant being honest of where you're at all the time. And he meant being you out of your heart. Sing or praise or speak or talk. And let that be worship. Because there's no way that you can take the scripture that says, out of babes thou hast perfected perfect praise, and make that appropriate for some worship leader to somehow come up with his program or his 3-song set or 7 songs or this, that, and the other thing. But God wants responsive connection of an intervention of your heart reaching out to his soul, and together you touching each other and being made whole. You see, God inhabits the praises of his people, but it wasn't meant just for a church service to go to and get that from. It's meant to be when you're really all alone. Do you sing the same way to God when you're alone with him? Wonderful Christian woman once sang for me, and whenever I bring it up, she sings it, and it's just powerful because it speaks to my heart. But it's a song that says, come away with me, my love, to a place beyond all reasoning. Partake within your heart of my perfect peace. I desire for you to know me in a way you've yet to taste of. Let me pour myself upon you into your love. And you know, when you think of come away with me, my love, you don't think of your lover of your soul as Jesus, unless you're a woman. I mean, men don't usually get that kind of connection. Unless you're gay, you know, if you're gay, hey, you know, go ahead, think that way. But, you know, men don't normally think of Jesus as the lover of my soul. But you see, I grew up around women. My mother was the strongest man I know, and she was a woman. Goes to show you what a truck stop waitress is like when she doesn't have someone to be her soulmate or to be her strength, and she has to be the one. She was kind of like, you would say, one of those legends, or one of those heroes in the Bible, Deborah or something. We're going to go out and fight in the name of the Lord. My mother was pretty tough. Well, she was full of laughter, but it's also pretty sarcastic. But when she got saved, she had the right heart, always. So, one of the things that I grew up with was being sensitized to my emotions. I know my emotions. They're very deep, but they're also very tender. They're very broad spectrum. I can feel them all. But they're also very acutely aware of what I feel at different times. Like tonight, I feel despair. Just sad. Just sad. 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 But, no, really. Sometimes it's okay. And that's what I wanted to really bring out in Songs in the Night tonight. It's okay to not be whatever you think you ought to be. It's okay. And that's really what we're going to title this, is that it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be righteous. You don't have to be holy. It's okay. God took care of it for you. You don't have to be full of joy or full of peace or full of love. You don't have to every day make a perfect, prayer to God or a perfect example of your life or be a perfect husband or a perfect wife. No, you don't. It's okay. And that's what I wanted to share tonight for myself. Not just to tell you it's okay, but really to hear the words myself so I can remind myself that there's a lot more I want to do, but I won't do, and I know I can't do. And just because I know I can't do it doesn't mean I don't want to do it. It doesn't mean that I don't try to do it. But I always go to bed exhausted, wanting to do so much more. But if I have a word from the Lord for you, if I have anything that God would speak to you, if I could receive it myself, for myself, God speaking, then I have to admit what He's telling us today, what He's telling you and I tonight is, it's okay. No, really, it's okay.